For my father, the king, Demacia, now and forever.
As the new dawn arose upon the kingdom, the newly crowned King Jarvan III Lightshield, who had just celebrated his coronation only a fortnight before, now he sat on the throne, accompanied by Lord Beret Bouvel, serving as his trusted advisor, as he ruled Demacia for not more than 2 weeks. By the strike of afternoon light, the duties of the king were now shifting through the day. Jarvan III listened and took notes from the nobles who had been invited to speak with him. One of these people was a fair lady named Lestara de Moisier. As Barrett sounded her name, both he and Lestara suddenly kept looking at each other, both taking notes on each other's attractiveness. The king noticed, but really didn't seem to mind. As Lestara stood before the king, the distracted Barrett snapped back to his duties and asked what Lestara wished to say or to ask of Jarvan III. She said that she wishes to talk about his failures. This confused the king because he was still relatively new to his post. At first, he thought it might have been more of those noble women who wanted to have a higher position of status, but this was not the case at all. What Lestara really meant was the still persistent issue of poor living conditions of the Demacian populace. She then removed and presented the necklace she wore around her neck, revealing the lit candle symbol of the Illuminators, the national church of the kingdom. She explained that the people had few to none, barely scraping a living, saying there are those in Demacia with neither a home nor a livelihood, and you have failed them in neglecting to provide it. The king was stunned, dumbfounded even. A silence filled the room for a moment, which only broke when Barrett let out a full belly laugh that bounced off the walls and echoed through the throne room. Barrett then slowly moved towards Lestara, took her hand, and said something that, unfortunately, could not be recalled by either the king or Lestara herself. However, what was clear to everyone's ears was Barrett's shame that the issue wasn't resolved much sooner. It is by this time that the Illuminators began to assist the countless refugees who still poured into the kingdom. The large upsurge was caused by the still ongoing conflict between the Kingdom of Demacia and the Empire of Noxus. The expansive, war-raging Noxians drove many people westward, who in turn sought refuge. In the background of all of this, Barrett would court Lestara numerous times. The two flattered each other, both showing an immense amount of affection, their bond very much strengthening more. Time would pass, and 4 times Barrett proposed for Lestara's hand in marriage, and 4 times Lestara would refuse. "Why would you keep asking when my answer remains the same?" asked Lestara. "It is precisely because your answer remains the same that I must keep asking," said Barrett patiently. This would be the 5th and very last time that Beret Bouvel would ask Lestara. Finally, she said yes. For Lestara de Moisier to finally accept, however, it was only when Barrett gave her a promise that the wealth of the Bouvel family would be used to help the incoming refugees, most especially the orphaned children. When the newly wedded couple ventured to one of these shelters for the orphans, the Illuminators were practically overwhelmed. One of its members said to the couple that it would take a few months at least until the orphans could find themselves a new home. Thankfully, Both Listara and Barrett gave their full support to keep their sponsor to help the shelter going. In the process, they would adopt a young girl who sat at a far corner of the sleeping quarters. The girl was playing an instrument 3 times her size, swaying in time with her own music. She started when Listara entered the room, and she didn't stop playing. The Illuminator member informed the couple that the girl couldn't speak, seemingly mute. However, Listara and Barrett decided to take her as their daughter, giving her the name Sona. Beyond the kingdom's walls, the war against the Noxian Empire still waged, though it's about to reach a new stage of fighting. The Noxian Grand General Borem Darkwill privately enacted a decree to free all of Noxus's mercenaries, prisoners, and even their reckoners to have them fill the ranks of the Noxian army, creating new warbands. One of these newly bolstered warbands was sent to attack the Demacians. This warband primarily consisted of Reckoner gladiators, now about to face the full might of the kingdom's defending army around the Argent Mountains, in a coastal fortress called Karlstead. When both sides came to a clash, most of the Reckoners broke ranks and fled the battlefield, using the opportunity to escape for freedom, whilst a very few stood their ground. Part of the few who refused to flee was a reckoner named Viscero. His efforts were forlorn, and he only surrendered when the Dauntless Vanguard, the most famous elite soldiers of Demacia, surrounded him. With his ankles chained to a wooden post, his wrists bound together with coarse rope, and his now torn Noxian tunic, Viscero stood tall, and was soon taken as the Demacians' prisoner. One of the soldiers then asked for his name. Seeing no need for his reckoner name anymore, he gave the soldier his true name, Xin Zhao. The soldier realized that it didn't sound like a Noxian name at all. But before the conversation continued, the sword captain of the Dauntless Vanguard, Tiana Crownguard, halted any further exchanges. By the next morning, Xin Zhao was woken up by a Demacian sergeant named Ulber, who was ordered to give him breakfast, while 4 others stood guard. They are just taking orders after all. Both Xin and Ulber and the guards exchanged words with each other. Mentions of the old King Jarvan II and the current King Jarvan III were spoken. Xin Zhao noted that the men spoke of their king with high regard, and soon realized that his warband was simply sent here to die. Ulber then asked Xin Zhao to present his hands once again to bind them with a new set of rope, since he had now finished his breakfast. The soldier standing guard observed that Xin Zhao bore many scars. Most of them were old. One of them asked what did he do in Noxus that gave him so many. Xin then answered that he was a reckoner. This jolted the guards with shock of amazement, but they have never heard of a reckoner with his name. Xin then explained that he used the name Viscero, which was a name that Ulber recognizes. The Noxian reckoner Viscero became famous for beating a minotaur. Shortly after realizing his feats, Ulber took off Xin's shackles. Xin Zhao was later given a new soft silk tunic and was now being tended to by one of the Demacian elder healers. He thanked them, but the healer told him to thank the king instead, since King Jarvan III made a royal decree that any prisoner captured by the army shall be treated fairly, and even giving prisoners to start anew if they willingly surrendered. Once his most recent wounds were mended, Xin Zhao walked behind Olber, who escorted him to be presented before the king, who stayed in his own royal tent. After Olber gave Xin Zhao the rules of courtesy, a loud and proud voice proclaimed, "The king welcomes Viscero!" And then Xin Zhao entered. He then knelt before the king, his gaze lowered. In a moment, the king then permitted Xin to raise his head. Once he did, he took notice of the two figures who were beside either side of Jarvan III, who sat on a raised oaken chair. He wears radiant gold-plated armor embellished with ebony spikes. Atop his head is a crown adorned with many jewels. By his right hand lies a great steel lance, its edges sharp like the teeth of some magnificent beast. To the king's left side was the sword captain of the dauntless vanguard, Tiana Crown Guard. The Crown Guards, as explained by their namesake, are the devoted royal guards of the king and protectors of the crown. To the king's right sat a young child dressed in royal robes. This was the king's son, Prince Jarvan, heir to the throne of Demacia. Viscero is quite an unusual name, King Jarvan III says. What is its origin? The king asked. Xin Zhao then peered his gaze back downward, hesitating, and wondering how he should respond. The sword captain then belts out, "You will speak when the king addresses you." "At ease, Tiana," the king says with a wave of his hand. "He is surely shocked by the events of these past few days. We would be right to offer this man his time, would we not?" The sword captain opens her mouth only to close it without a word, choosing instead to give a curt nod. After that exchange, Xin raised his head again and gave his answer to the king's question. "It is a reminder of my home." The king, now intrigued. "Oh, is that so? I have studied much of Noxus, yet I have never heard of a place called Viscero." "It is not so much of a place, but a memory, albeit one that changed the meaning in Noxus." "Ah," the king says, looking briefly at his son. "Memories of one's childhood are such, but it is not my real name." With the sudden and unexpected interruption, the sword captain roared with her hand clutching the hilt of her sword. "You dare interrupt the king?" Before she could unsheath her blade, a full hearty laugh broke the tension. Xin raised his head to see that it came from the king. "You are the first one today to have caused Tiana such grievance," the king said. "It is her inaugural battle leading the dauntless vanguard, though it was not so much of a battle, I am sure you would agree. Please, tell us your story, Viscero, whose real name has not yet been revealed to me." With more comfort, he swallowed his throat and began to recite his life story, revealing his true birth name of Xin Zhao, a man from the First Lands, Ionia, as the people of Valoran call it, born in a coastal village called Rykon. He further explained his childhood spent entirely on a fishing boat named Viscero, where he helped the elders with whatever they needed. Life was simple, peaceful, until the Noxian marauders came with their red and black ships. His story intrigued all of those present in the tent. Not a single Demacian spoke a word. He continued that during his time in Noxus, as a reckoner in the arena, led to where he is now. You have lived quite the life," the king finally says. He glances at his son, before looking back at Xin Zhao. "Thank you for sharing with us your journey. It makes me and all of Demacia proud to be able to release you from the bonds of Noxus." The king then gave a nod to one of the guardsmen, who then presented a small pouch filled with gold to be given to Zin. Sword Captain Tiana explained that it was enough gold to last him a full week of travel. However, Xin Zhao didn't accept. He then asked King Jarvan III for a request, and the king asked what it might be. He requested to be part of his royal guard. Tiana felt that it was an insult, shouting that it was absurd, but the king waved his hand as he let out a chuckle. He encouraged Tiana to let Xin explain why he would be worthy to be a member of his guard. It was at a glance. Xin Zhao took the pouch of gold from the guard's hand and threw it towards the face of the sword captain. He then quickly swept off the legs of a guard from their feet, who was positioned to his left, to then catch his spear. In a swift motion, he swung the spear in a circle to trip another guard to his right. With one final twirl of the weapon, he jabs it forward at Jarvan III, its blunt end stopping inches short from the king's throat. The young prince who stayed seated gasped in shock. The other king's guards gathered, and the sword captain quickly drew her blade once she recovered. Xin Zhao then lowered the spear and knelt back to the ground. Tension fills the tent. All eyes locked onto Xin, whose own eyes are closed, at peace, ready to accept whatever comes next. The king, who stayed seated, straightened his cloak. "Stand down," he commands. My father once said Noxus wasted its talent in those arenas. Now I see the truth in his words. "My king!" Captain Crown Guard yelled. "He tried to kill you!" "No, Tiana," the king replied. "He showed me how I could be killed, even in front of my very own trusted gods." "My deepest apologies," Xin Zhao replies. His voice is calm and measured, a quiet tide not yet ready to flow ashore. "It was the only way I thought to demonstrate myself." "And demonstrated you did," the king says. "To me, and these warriors of Demacia, it appears they could learn a thing or two from you." Crown Guard's face filled with disgust, and her voice filled with malice, stating to the king that she will not have a mere prisoner sully the king's guard. "When this man entered my sight, he was a prisoner no more." The king then stands from his chair. "Demacia was founded long ago, by good people who sought refuge from the evils of this world. This man's story reminds me of those tales of old, of great Orlon and his followers, the very ones my father once told me." The king then stepped forward and brought the former reckoner to his feet. "Xin Zhao, you have touched me with your life and your courage, a rare thing I have not felt in some time. Though you may not have been born a Demacian, I shall allow you to travel back with us to my kingdom, where you will then prove yourself and your loyalty as my personal god." From their travels back to the great city, the old Noxian reckoner, who was taken away from the First Lands, was no more. Now, Xin Zhao, member of the King's Guard, royal advisor and friend, then emerged. Some time would pass since the battle in Karlstead. The reign of King Jarvan III kept strong against the Noxians. Xin Zhao, now known by his new title and rank of Seneschal, was assigned to teach the king's son on the lessons of history and politics of Valoran. The young prince's youth was filled not only with these lessons, but also military training in swordsmanship and the myriad arts of war. During his training, Prince Jarvan found himself facing a brash young youth from the Crown Guard family named Garen, whose aunt was Tiana Crown Guard. The two were of similar age when they both began their training, and soon became a quick pair. Jarvan admired Garen's sheer determination and fortitude, and Garen looked up to the prince's tactical instincts. Once he came of age, the young Prince Jarvan received the honorary rank of general. However, the prince had a knack for wanting to prove to the royal court, most especially his father, that he was worthy of his rank, and not because he was the king's son and the heir to the throne. While it was not necessarily expected that the heir to the throne would take to the field of battle, Jarvan was determined to prove himself, with or without the king's blessing. Prince Jarvan then pledged to bring stability back to the region beyond the Argent Mountains, which to this day had long been contested by the Empire of Noxus, creating an almost lawless frontier where foreign ravagers and warring tribes threatened many of Demacia's allies. He also remembered the stories of his great-grandfather being slain by a foul Noxian brute. Nothing short of an insult this was. Now, that insult would finally be answered. His army soon began to march. Though, as he marched through the Argent Mountains, the carnage that Prince Jarvan witnessed in the outlying towns troubled him deeply. When word came that the gates of morning had fallen, he resolved to drive onward into further Noxian territory, all against the advice of his own lieutenants. As the Demacian army marched forward, they soon found themselves in peril. Inevitably, with the battalion spread so thin, Jarvan was encircled and defeated by Noxian warbands before he even reached Travail. Refusing to surrender, the prince and a handful of other survivors from his army fled into the forests, only to be hounded for days and days by enemy scouts. One of those among the survivors was a captain of the Dauntless Vanguard, Barrett Bouvel. He accompanied the prince in his campaign as his guard, at the request of the king. When the prince's army saw itself surrounded by the Noxians, Barrett would be slain in battle, all in serving his oathful duty to protect the prince. Eventually, in the chaos of battle for their lives, an arrow pierced through the prince's side. He then collapsed into the shade of a fallen tree, where he drifted in and out of consciousness. Prince Jarvan was devastated. He realized he had failed his family. He failed his kingdom. And he failed his brothers in arms. And then the prince shut his eyes for what he felt was the last time, slowly accepting the end.